Welcome back to the channel. In today's session, we're going to show you how to take the grid tool and turn that into a template you can reuse over and over again. So if you're someone like me that has to cut concrete into a particular pattern, I need to know how many lineal feet is in that pattern. And I want to be able to easily use that pattern over and over again and price it out with not having to go through a lot of steps. So we're going to create a grid, and we're going to then turn that into a template with basically 8 steps that you see in front of you. So you need to have an area takeoff completed so we can overlay this area with this grid. We're going to open up the grid tool Takeoff. We're going to then select the colors and options, select the size of our grid, and then trace the area we want to grid, basically retracing an area that we've already done for square footage, for example. We're going to then open that Takeoff in the advanced window, and we're going to add some fields and change some values so we can turn that into a template. And then after we're done with that, we're going to save that Takeoff as a template and test it. It's not as complicated as it sounds, and we're going to walk you through it step by step. So let's get started. So first of all, step 1. You want to have an area already drawn or completed on your plan. We have one we're showing here. This is an area of slab demo that I need to remove. So I've already calculated the square footage of the slab demo. I know it's 4 inches thick. It's approximately 3,010 square feet. I want to cut that up into a pattern so I can calculate my amount of saw cutting I'll have to do. So we're going to start off. You've got your area already drawn out. If you've not, go into PlanSwift and just take an area, draw a box like we've got here. It really doesn't matter the size because the principle will be the same. So we've got our box, and we're going to go up to area, and we're not going to click on area. We're going to click on the down arrow, and we're going to pick grid tool. Now the property box that pops up here is the standard grid tool you'll see every time you do this from scratch. Now when you have your template made, we're going to customize this so we only use the portions of this form that we want to. Like we've done in previous videos, we customize the form so it comes up and just gives you what you need, not a bunch of stuff you don't need. So it's automatically on name. We're going to change the name, and you could call it anything you want to. For my purposes, I'm going to call it slab saw cutting. So I'm going to type that in, and it really doesn't matter what you type in. You can put in spaces, you can put in just about anything you want to, and you can change it as you're using it, which is the big thing. So slab saw cutting. And that's all I'm going to say at this point. I'm going to leave automatically generate checked. Under color, I am going to select none, because as I'm drawing this or drawing this area, because this really is an area tool, I don't want it to put a color over what I've already done. I want the color to be negative or none, because when a grid shows up, I don't want the color to hide the grid. So really simply, just select none, and you're good to go. Fill type solid. The only thing else we're going to do for the purposes of this template building is pick a vertical spacing. So I'm going to go 48 for inches, because PlanSwift assumes you're typing in inches. So just do a simple conversion if you actually are doing it from feet. I'm going to do a 48 by 48 or 4 by 4 grid. The select parallel sides, select start point, and count intersections I'm not going to choose, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Folder, I'm going to leave blank and just click OK, and it starts you in the grid tool Takeoff, and you know that because your icon for your mouse icon is changed to this little kind of hashtag, which basically says click points, and basically click points of whatever you're wanting the grid tool to be. We've already taken off an area, so as we get close to a point or data point in there, we'll see if you've got snap set to on, which I always recommend you do. You'll see a little red box pop up, and once that little red box pops up, we can left click, same, and we're just going to go around We're going to complete the box and hit escape or click digitize record to turn it off. Now we got a nice little grid. And I don't like the color because it's random, the color it chooses. So I'm going to go over, and where you see on the right side, you could do it on the left side on the page feature. But I'm just going to go and change the color to something that I can better see. And that's always going to be the same with any time you use the grid tool. It's going to pick a random color. If you're using that grid in your presentation to your client, then obviously change the color. All right, so at this point, we've got a grid, basically a 4x4 grid that we could change if we wanted to. But for right now, we're going to leave it the way it is. And if we go into our estimating tab, we now see under saw cutting, this is you see that hashtag tells you that it was a grid takeoff, and we see a child, basically a takeoff in a child function. It says grid lines, and it'll have a number after that. Every time you do a grid takeoff, you'll get a series of this grid lines, and it will basically says how many lines did it draw based on your parameters, your spacing. It drew 1,435.25 feet. Well, we want, then that's fine. We want the grid tool to show us not square footage for as it summarizes, because this is a parent, this is a child, so keep that in mind. It's supposed to be summarizing it. Well, I don't need to see square foot. I already know what the square footage is. I need to convert this to a lineal foot calculation that adds all the children that's underneath it. Every grid line that pops up underneath it, it adds it up along with the perimeter of what I just did. Now that's an important feature here. When I'm adding the grid lines, right, I'm adding the perimeter, which is my saw cutting, plus what's inside it, which is the grid lines. Now, if you've got to if you're only concerned with what's inside the grid lines, is a little different feature, and we'll talk about that after we create the template. For the purposes of me changing this from square footage to lineal footage, I need to go into the properties. Now, when you click on that, it brings up the form, which we're going to change before we're through. Right now, we're going to go in advanced, and we're going to change how this, because we're actually going to use this as a template, how it's quantifying what you're saying. All right. So we're going to click in the formula box for quantity under the estimating group, and I'm going to backspace. And I'll show you this on the screen so you can see. You may not be able to see it as I type it in. We're using basically an at-sum type of formula. If you're familiar with Excel, how at-sums work. This formula, rather than start with an at symbol, starts with an exclamation point. And what it does, it adds up all the linear totals that are in the children plus the linear total that's in what you just took off. Now, it sounds real complicated, but when you drew this box, you drew a perimeter. That perimeter is the linear total. Every time I draw something with this grid tool, I'm making a linear total calculation with those grids. So it adds it to it. But it only adds the cross cuts, not the outside. It adds the outside once, and then the cross cuts are all added to it. It sounds confusing, I know, but follow me on this. We're going to type in, we're going to start our formula with a block, a left block, and on your keyboard, it's right next to the P, letter P, and it's the lower one, the block, not the squiggly line, okay? And we're going to go exclamation, and we're going to type in sum, and then we're going to open a parentheses, because now we're saying, okay, the exclamation sum is the function. And now we're saying what fields do we want that function to be on, and we want those fields to be on linear total. Because I'm cutting the perimeter and the inside in that configuration in those 4x4s, I need to know the total footage. It's now giving me the total footage. And as you've seen in previous videos, I always like to round up, so I'm going to go up top here and click on RoundUp. and then I click outside of it, and it's going to take away any decimals. So now the last thing I need to do, it still thinks it's in square footage, so I'll change the scale units to feet. And then once I've done that, I will lock the formula over on the right side, or little locks that we've talked about before. And that formula is set. It's calculating properly. If you went through and went back and did the math, you would see 1668 rounded up is the proper amount of perimeter plus the interior grid. Now, other things that I want to do, because I'm saving this as a template, is I want to be able to give it a cost. To give it a cost, I need to be able to tell it, well, this is slab saw cutting. Well, how thick is it? I haven't defined how thick the slab saw, how thick the slab is, how thick I'm cutting. So I need to add that field. So we add a field by staying in the group, estimating group, and we come up at the very top, add property. And I don't typically like to use a field name I've already used in another template. So I'll call this cut depth. I don't need to do anything else in all these fields. I'm going to leave it as 2 decimal places in case typically where I might have something that is a half inch, 3/4 inch, and so forth. I want the decimal places to equivalent that fraction. So that's all I'll do. Click OK. And now I have, you see, I've created a field, cut depth. And as a default right now, I'm going to put in number 6, and I'm going to tell it this is inches. And I'm not going to lock this field because we're going to change it at the end, and it'll be obviously why we're doing that at the end. So right now, okay, it calculating properly how many feet of cutting we're going to do. Nice little grid. The only thing I need to do is now say, well, what is my cost for this? So I'm going to bring up my template editor or my formula editor. That's that little 3-dot box that's always on the right side. And I'm going to put in 0.50 for 50 cents. And I'm going to hit the times button. And I want to put in that cut depth that I just created. I could do it 2 ways. I could type it in, or I could go to my little insert property box and go to the right side. And usually when you create something, it's down at the bottom until it indexes it back somewhere else. It's kind of random. And there it is at the bottom. And I leave it relative path, and I go OK. And now it's 50 cents times whatever the cut depth is. So 50 cents times 6. I click OK. Now, one thing I'll tell you about, if you're ever looking for the result in the bottom of these formula editors, it's always been a bug in PlanSwift as long as I can remember that the result doesn't show. Don't know why. I'm sure one day they'll fix that, but it will show in the result once you hit OK basically in your record properties, which is what we're going into next. So this is the record properties screen, and we see that it's actually give you a result of 3, which is correct. So when I use this, if I change the variable is the cut depth, I could change it to 4 inches, for example, 4, and the price would change accordingly. So anytime this comes up as a template, I can go and change the depth if I want to, and I've got a new price. I could also do a series of pricing based on tables, but that's more advanced, and we're going to get into that as we get further down this rabbit hole of doing templates and assemblies. So we're going to, at this point, we're going to go OK, and we can see now that it says slab saw cutting, 1,668 feet at $3 per foot equals $5,004. You always want to check the math when you create formulas in templates to make sure it's that you haven't done anything that the end result is not what you're expecting. Basically, we're going to go into advanced, and we're going to turn off anything we don't want to see. In this case, I really don't want to care about color, fill type, hatch, patterns, all that good stuff. I turn that off. I don't need to see that in my dialog box that comes up with my form. I do want to see under grid properties here, I don't usually use angle, so I will turn that off. I don't use a lot of the other ones, but for the purposes of this, we'll leave it on. And automatically generate, I leave that unchecked because I always want it to generate a new grid. So what's going to show up in the form is the horizontal and vertical spacing and these options for changing how the grid works. Now if I look at my form, we can see that, oh, that's not too bad. Saw cutting, there's my vertical, horizontal, and there's my options. Very simple. Only thing else I might want to do is if I wanted to show the price in this, then I could go back and say, well, also show me the cost or price. I'm going to click on cost, and I'm going to click on markup. Now, if you can't click on a box because it's locked, simply go back and unlock it, and then click it, and it'll show up. If I go to a form layout, I can now put these two together a little bit easier and say I want cost above markup, and I want it on the same line there. And we had a whole video of how to change the properties in these boxes here, the last video. So if you really don't have that good handle on that, go to our previous video on templates, and it spends more time telling you how to organize this form layout, so every time you start a template, it looks like this. All right. Basically, we're done at this point. We could put in descriptions and other things, but we've got enough as a template to save it so we can reuse it. And we're going to show you how to do that now. So simply be on your item. You're in your estimating tab, your item that we just modified, and right click and go copy, and then go to your templates tab, and whatever, if you're using different groups of templates or you just have a single group, just go in there and right click and say paste. If I do that, it'll do it as a single item, a standalone item that we use any time. If I paste it as a sub-item, then it will basically start the creation of a template. And we're going to do that in a minute. Right now, we're just going to say paste so it shows up as an item. And it's kind of random where it puts it depending on where your cursor was. So I can always change it with these adjust arrows. And the last thing you want to do is you'll have a blank grid lines, which it ends up being a blank in reality, because it doesn't copy the data over when it creates a template. We want to delete that. You can either highlight it and delete it or right click and delete it. We don't need it because every time you use this grid tool over and over again, it'll create new grid lines, and we don't want blank ones being in there. It's confusing. All right. So I am going to basically take up let's go to another page. And here's a couple boxes here we can use. And we're going to say, well, let's try this, go over the templates, and make sure this is working. So we've got under our training templates, we see there's a template now available called slab saw cutting. We click the record button on that, and we get our nice, cool little dialog box. At this point, we could say, we could add slab cutting in. We could put in the term 6 inches, or say slab cutting for new freezer. And it's nice that we've got it right there that we can type it in. We can change the calculation for the cost. Usually I do not do that in a dialog box here, but you could if you wanted to. We could just zero that out and put in whatever we want to. We could put a % markup in there. And of course, the big thing about this is spacing. I'm going to go and change this to 24. And I'm not going to select any of these boxes because I don't need to. I've got a nice square perpendicular box, perpendicular to your plan page. It's not diagonal, so I don't need to select any of these other options. OK, and it's there again. It's going to try to snap in. If you've already got a takeoff, we don't have a takeoff here, but we've got a box driven, so I want to show you what it would look like. No color is adding to it. I hit escape, and I've got a grid really of nothing, but I basically set up a grid of any area I want to. And if we go to estimating, we see we have a new slab cutting for new freezer. And it says 302 feet. And if you went back and did the math and wanted to actually check it, and usually I do when I'm creating templates like this, you would see that 302 feet is these grid lines plus the perimeter. Well, now how do I get rid of the perimeter? That's also fairly easy. We go back into our properties and we have to go and open up our formula, and we'll click on that. And I am going to, inside the RoundUp, I am going to say I go one character inside, so I'm inside the RoundUp, and I'll say minus linear total. And it says 241. Guess what? If you go to your grid lines, you'll see, because remember this is still doing a roundup. Even though it's 240.04, it's rounding up to the next decimal. So by taking out, because just the way PlanSwift works, it's going to add up all the linear totals from parent through all the children. So if I want to get rid of the perimeter, I simply are getting rid of the linear total for the parent, not the children. There again, I'm going to put both of these formulas in my comments, as well as you'll see them on the screen as we're doing them. So if you need the perimeter and whatever grid you're drawing, you got that first formula. If you're only interested in what the grid is drawn, you could, of course, add up all the children yourself, or you could simply add this to your formula, and when it summarizes, it will take out that perimeter of your parent and only give you the grids that you're seeing underneath your parent. And that every time you draw that over and over again, and I'll show you. Let's add to it. I'll go to this next box here, and I'll go to my takeoff summary, and there's what I've already created, and that's you can see it says, let me open this up a little bit. It says 241, which is the roundup at 240, and I'm going to use this to draw it again. I'm going to go over here and do this next box. Hit escape, and it does it a little different color, but remember what I told you about the colors. You can change the colors. If I go back to estimating, now I see it says 432. Well, let's check that. Remember, it's rounding up. So 240.04 plus 191.31 equals 431.35. It's perfect. It rounded it up because it's taking away the perimeter as out of the calculation. So go back, and we could do this over and over again, and it would keep on creating this grid over and over until the cows come home. There's basically 8 steps that you need to do to recreate what we just did on the screen. 1, have an area takeoff completed. 2, start an area grid takeoff under area and get your grid going. 3, select the color and options when the dialog box comes up. 4, select the size of the grid in inches. 5, trace the area of your previous takeoff or a new takeoff. 6, open up the takeoff under the Advanced tab and make the changes that we talked about, putting in the formula that changes the square footage to a linear footage, basically a summary of the linear footage in all your grids. And then 8, save that template in your Templates tab so you can reuse it over and over again. Well, we hope you've enjoyed learning how to make a grid template. In our next video, we're going to turn this grid template into an assembly. Those assemblies is going to make your life easier as an estimator. Please like the video if you've learned something today, and please subscribe so you always will be aware of new content as it comes out. We'll see you next time.